My cousin accused me of something horrible, and I was kicked out of the house. Years later, she confesses why she is dying, but it's not enough for me. Hello everyone, I'm 36 years old and I have a dilemma for you. I'm not sure how I feel, possibly very alone. I have nowhere else to turn. I've been an avid reader here and felt this was the best place to share my story. I would appreciate any advice I can get. There's a lot of background information to go over with all of you, so this is going to be a long post. First, let me tell you about my cousin Sabrina, who is 35 years old. She is the worst trash I have ever known. I know it's something harsh and cold to say about one's own cousin, but for Sabrina, it's the truth. Then there are Mom, 65, and Dad, 65, who are equally bad, which I will talk about shortly. I tried to be understanding with Sabrina as I got older and learned about psychology and what leads people to do horrible things to others. But at the end of the day, I could never forgive her, and I still hate my whole family to this day. Sure, Sabrina had a tough childhood. As a child, my uncle, Sabrina's father, who is my father's brother, was the black sheep of the family. He was an abusive jerk. He drank and smoked all the time and never worked. And if that wasn't enough, he abused Sabrina. Sabrina's mother wasn't much better. I understand the power of trauma on people, especially when they suffer abuse at such a young and vulnerable age. However, it is our responsibility as human beings to overcome our trauma so as not to inflict the same pain we endured on those around us. Sabrina, unfortunately, never learned this and became very much like her parents in many ways. My parents were well aware of the situation regarding Sabrina's home life, so they were always quite protective of her. They tried to intervene at times, even calling Child Protective Services to report my aunt and uncle. But when authorities arrived, Sabrina's parents always managed to get away with it. Then one day, Sabrina's parents were involved in an accident. They were driving with quite a bit of alcohol in their system, crashed into another car, and died. Sabrina was left an orphan, which is obviously a difficult trauma to bear even when the parents are as bad as Sabrina's. Instead of letting Sabrina be dragged into the foster care system, my parents stepped in and adopted her. Although I had never spent much time with Sabrina despite our numerous family interactions, and despite all my interactions with Sabrina as little kids being quite unpleasant. I was initially excited about the idea of having a little sister at home. Sure, she was only a year younger than me, but I often felt lonely as an only child and was excited to have a playmate. If only I had known the sharp turn my life would take after this crucial moment, I would have begged my parents to send Sabrina to Siberia, because that place is as cold as my cousin's heart. My mom and dad were not perfect parental figures themselves. They drank too much, weren't great with money, but they worked hard to provide for me. They tried their best to support me. But from a young age, I had heard my mother complain to her friends about how she had always wanted a daughter instead of a son. She didn't know I was in the next room listening. But even as a small child, I understood those words, and the words hurt like a blade. As soon as Sabrina was in our house, Mom and Dad acted as if I didn't even exist. I had always been a clumsy and introverted child, and I guess this disappointed my traditionalist parents. My dad had been the captain of the football team in high school, and I couldn't even throw a ball without tripping over my shoelaces. I was awkward and always felt uncomfortable around girls. My dad had been a ladies' man when he was young, flirting with everyone in town before settling down with my mother. Meanwhile, I couldn't get a girl to like me, no matter what. My parents always told me I needed to be tougher, telling me I was weak. So my self-esteem was already low enough, and when Sabrina came along, it was completely shattered. Mom and Dad loved Sabrina and adored everything she did. If she drew a picture, it was hung on the refrigerator, even if it looked like trash. If I drew a picture, it was given a quick glance and set aside. Sabrina was praised by my parents for getting B's in class. Meanwhile, I got A's and was never told they were proud of me. Sabrina had the best birthday parties, received the best Christmas gifts, and when Sabrina started going to school with me, my social life simply went down the drain. She might have been a grade below me in school, but she went out of her way to make my life hell. I was an awkward nerd, and Sabrina was a pretty and sociable girl who loved to talk and gossip about others. She was immediately accepted into the popular crowd, the jocks, and the cheerleaders. These were the people who loved to torment me, and Sabrina jumped right into it like a fish to water. Her boyfriend was the captain of the football team and was my biggest bully. He and his jerk friends would do cruel things to me, like giving me swirlies and other humiliating torments. No matter how much I tried to avoid it, I got beaten up every day. Sabrina never defended me. Instead, she stood by, smiling or sometimes openly laughing at my pain. I'm not kidding when I say Sabrina has always been a sociopath. As if it wasn't enough to make my school life an endless wave of torment and anguish, Sabrina was determined to make my life at home even worse. I felt like I was living in a prison, and then the torture would start again the next day at school. I never had a break. The mental damage this period of my life caused cannot be overstated. It is a pain that changed me forever and damaged me for life due to all the abuse I endured. I tried to tell my parents about Sabrina's friends bullying me at school, but they said it was nothing and even mocked me for not being man enough to take some jokes. They said it was just boys being boys. My dad always said I needed to be more of a man if I wanted to stop being bullied. They saw me with black eyes and bruises, and yet they had no compassion for me. Sabrina would stand by and laugh out loud during these discussions. Besides this, Sabrina was constantly making up lies about me. She would break things around the house and tell my parents that I did it. She would cry and tell my parents that I had hit her. Sometimes she made me think I was losing my mind. She was such a good manipulator that she could almost make you wonder if you really did the thing she was lying about. Of course, my parents believed every word she said. I lost count of how many times I was punished for something she said that obviously hadn't happened. This affected my mind over time, making me feel lesser, as if I wasn't valuable. As time passed, I became more and more depressed, and my grades began to drop. They were still better than Sabrina's grades, but my parents still punished me for this slip, which increased the depression and feelings of worthlessness. Since I had unfortunately let my grades drop, I couldn't get into the college I wanted to go to. I was stuck in this town, in this house. I had to go to the local community college, but I quickly worked hard to get a degree in engineering. I wanted to succeed and get as far away from my horrible family as possible. Sabrina had no plans for her future. She didn't even graduate. She dropped out early in her senior year and ended up sleeping with almost every guy in town, or at least it seemed that way because I always saw her with someone different. She started partying all the time and going out. She also got hooked on drugs. My parents kept taking care of her and making excuses for her. Not that it seemed right how she acted, but they were too lenient with Sabrina, giving her little to no incentive to change her ways. I was still living at home during this time, and Sabrina's abuse towards me was getting worse and worse. I remember one afternoon. She was having a party at home with her then boyfriend. I was trying to study for an exam, so I asked them to lower the volume. I was polite and kind in my tone of voice, but Sabrina and her boyfriend took my request as an offense. Sabrina told her boyfriend to beat me up, and boy did he. He hit me so hard that I had to call the police. I was hospitalized for my injuries, yet my parents and Sabrina told me I was overreacting. They even convinced me not to press charges against that fool. Looking back, I should have sued them all. Then came that fateful day when I was 21 years old. That changed my life forever. Just so you know, Sabrina could never stand not being the center of attention. Everything had to be about her. She acted as if she were the center of the universe, and whenever something went wrong in her personal life, she took it out on others. Also, as you can imagine, she made bad decisions, so much so that she got pregnant by one of her boyfriends, which I will talk about later. Sure, she was often cruel and unfair to my parents, especially considering all the good deeds they did for her over the years, but Sabrina's first target whenever something went wrong in her life was always me. Sabrina had recently been dumped by another boyfriend. I guess this particular guy thought he was the one in her damaged and immature mind, and she was particularly upset and devastated when he left her. Sabrina wasn't exactly good at choosing the best kinds of men either. To complicate matters further, this boyfriend who had just left Sabrina happened to be the father of her son Tyron. She was already struggling to take good care of the young boy, and most of the parenting responsibilities had fallen on me and my parents. It was an unpleasant scenario and not one I was happy with. Sabrina had been especially bitter and rude lately, despite all of us doing her a huge favor without asking for anything in return. As it's not easy to care for a baby, especially when the mother does very little for him. Just before the event that would change my life forever, Sabrina and I had an argument. This was routine. We were always arguing, and often it got quite heated, so I didn't think much of it. But during the argument, I was tired of being belittled by Sabrina. She called me an ugly loser, a pathetic virgin. She continuously mistreated me, and I had simply had enough. I exploded and told her she would always be abandoned by every man she dated because she was worthless. She looked angry and walked away like a small child. I didn't think much of the comment, but I guess Sabrina took it personally. I was busy with my own things one day when suddenly my parents literally kicked down my bedroom door. I was a little scared because I didn't expect them to enter my room like that, so I asked them what was going on. Mom and Dad and even some other family members had all barged into my room. Needless to say, I was more confused with each passing second. I saw Sabrina walking in crying. She looked inconsolable, but I could tell it was just an act. I had a horrible feeling about what was about to happen, and my suspicions were truly terrifying. That's when Sabrina dropped a bombshell on me when she said, "There he is. He's the one who assaulted me." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe she was accusing me of that. I immediately thought about the argument we had had a couple of days before this. I asked her if that was why she was doing this, and my dad immediately stepped in and told me to shut up and stop making excuses. I kept denying the accusations, and then the beatings began. My entire family started beating me. It was brutal, much worse than the countless beatings I had already endured at school. They bluntly told me to pack my belongings and leave immediately and reminded me that I should feel lucky they weren't reporting me to the authorities. I wanted to defend my innocence once more, but they told me to shut up. My entire family had just disowned me based on the word of the spoiled, cruel girl that was Sabrina. It was the worst day of my life. At first, it was difficult because it's not like I had anywhere to go. I had some savings, but that only got me a small room. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs and studied full-time, and eventually, I saved enough money to get my own place. I did it all by myself, with no support from anyone but me. Now I'm 36 years old, and I haven't spoken to my family since that fateful day when they beat me up and disowned me. But today, I faced a new dilemma. I received a call from Sabrina today. It was from my parents' phone number. I guess Sabrina still lives with them, even though it had been so long since we last spoke. I immediately recognized her voice and froze. Even hearing Sabrina's voice was a trigger for my trauma. However, Sabrina spoke in a different tone of voice. I asked her why she was calling. She asked how I had been, something she had never asked me before, and then explained that she was dying of terminal cancer. I said nothing. Then she told me she was a single mother, that Tyron was 17 now, and she had another son named Phil, who was 14 years old. She said she was divorced and her ex-husband was in prison. Then she apologized and told me that God was punishing her for making up lies about me. She asked for my forgiveness. I told her I needed time to think and hung up the phone. My heart was racing. Shortly after the phone call, she sent me a text message detailing everything. She reiterated how sorry she was for all of it. She lamented the fact that her 2 children were going to grow up without a mother and pointed out the fact that she had been a horrible person all her life. I still haven't responded to the text message. I am torn about how to respond. Should I forgive Sabrina? I must admit I still hate her with all my heart. Let me know what you think. Update 1. I received a lot of good advice. Some said I should overlook it and show forgiveness. I understand the idea that hatred towards another person is simply a mental burden. However, others explained that Sabrina's terminal illness was no reason to forgive her for what she had done. My family would probably still be the same toxic people as always. So after thinking it over, I made my decision. This might disappoint some of you, but I chose the path of revenge. I found Sabrina's Facebook page, and I could easily find Phil and Tyrone on her friends list. I sent them screenshots of Sabrina's confession. Then I tracked down Sabrina's ex-husband, who even though he was in jail still had his Facebook account. Then I went down the list and sent the confession to my parents and other family members. I want everyone to know that Sabrina is a big piece of trash. And I think the world would be better if she were flushed down the toilet. I know this is not going to turn out well, but at least I feel better. Update 2. Good afternoon, folks. Oh, do I have an update for you all? Can you believe my parents dared to call me today with a bunch of nonsense? I know it's been 15 years since we last spoke, but frankly, I wasn't in a hurry to speak to my parents ever again. I should have known they would try to contact me after I dropped a bomb on them about their golden child, Sabrina, yesterday. To my surprise, those people I called Mom and Dad apologized to me at first. They acknowledged it was wrong of them to kick me out based solely on Sabrina's words without hearing my side of the story. I reminded them they always did that, even before that incident happened. I guess Mom and Dad expected me to be happier to hear their apologies, so they dropped that and immediately mentioned Sabrina's cancer. They told me it was wrong of me to involve Sabrina's children and ex-husband and said I should have waited a bit longer to tell the family about this. I was blunt and told them I didn't care. I told both of them they should have considered all of that before kicking me out and ruining my life. And I reminded them they conveniently omitted the part about how the whole family beat me up without even listening to what I had to say. I was furious and hung up the phone, hoping never to hear from them again. Update 3. Hello, wonderful people. Today is a beautiful day. I received some great news and just wanted to drop by to share it with all of you. Today I received another call from my parents. I hesitated to answer, but then I thought they would only call if it was something important, so I picked up the phone. My parents were crying uncontrollably. They told me that Sabrina had passed away that morning. Wow, it had only been 3 weeks since she confessed her guilt to me, and now she was gone. I must admit I might sound cold and insensitive, but I felt nothing upon hearing the news. My parents asked why I wasn't saying anything when I didn't respond to the news for a while, and I told them I simply didn't care. They told me it was heartless and cruel to say something like that about my own cousin, but I reminded my parents they were the ones who abandoned their only child. I heard the beginning of their protests as they started to scold and humiliate me, but I wasn't in the mood to put up with their nonsense, so I hung up the phone just like I did last time. Sabrina is dead, which is good for me because now at least she won't be around to bother me. But I feel like my family doesn't fully understand the situation, so to speak. I think everyone needs to learn a lesson. I don't want to sound cruel here, but I think more revenge is necessary for my family to really get the message. So I've decided I have something planned for my family. I have a plan up my sleeve, in fact, and I'll be back soon to explain the details to all of you because today I don't have much time, and I just wanted to drop in to share the updates about my life. Update 4. Hello everyone, I have another update for you. Today was great, everything went according to plan. I'll get straight to the point and explain all the details. It wasn't hard to find the details of Sabrina's funeral. I was surprised they were even having a funeral for this disgusting woman, considering I'm not sure who would want to attend. But I found the details online and made my preparations. I even rented a tuxedo that would look good at the funeral. I hadn't been invited to the funeral, so I decided to invite myself and give my old family a little surprise visit. I wasn't sure if anyone would recognize me, considering it had been 15 years since any of these fools had last seen me. No one ever cared to ask how I was. I arrived at the funeral and was a bit late to the service, so it had already started when I walked through the church doors. There was a large gathering of people, which surprised me because you know what I think of her. But it was better for my plan, as this only gave me a larger audience for the little plan I had prepared for everyone. When it was time for someone to say a few words about the deceased, I stepped up to the podium. I heard someone murmur, "It's him," as if the only thing that stood out about me was her lie. That's when I began to give my speech. Basically, it was a speech I had prepared on a piece of paper where I exposed all the mistreatment I had suffered from Sabrina and the rest of the family. I exposed Sabrina for every vile act of cruelty she had inflicted on me, and I didn't care if her children were watching. They needed to know their mother was an evil woman. I also recounted how my family turned their backs on me when Sabrina falsely accused me. My dad stood up and told me to shut up and leave. He said I was ruining the entire funeral and that no one in the whole building wanted to hear me spread lies about Sabrina. They were still defending the trash, even after knowing the truth about her. Dad threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. I'm not a violent person, but I was ready and willing to fight this old man. That's when Phil and Tyron stood up and spoke. No one had asked them what they thought about all of this. Well, Phil and Tyron confirmed everything I said about Sabrina. They said Sabrina neglected them, mistreated them, and spent all her money on drugs and alcohol. There was an uproar in the funeral hall, and I could see the family was upset. I guess this information impacted them differently, coming from Sabrina's own children instead of me, the black sheep of the family. I left them all murmuring and arguing among themselves. I had said what I needed to say and was done with this garbage family. I walked out of the funeral and went back to my apartment. So that was my revenge. Maybe it wasn't enough, but it made me feel a little better about myself after years of torture. Update 5. Hello everyone, it's me here with one last update for all of you. I just wanted to let you know that I couldn't have survived without Reddit's support and all the excellent advice I received from many of you. The point of this update is that I wanted to share some additional details about what happened with my parents and Sabrina's children after all this time. After everything that happened, I found out more details about my parents' lives. It turns out that after abandoning me and treating me in the cruelest way possible, their lives were not exactly a bed of roses. My father, who used to drink alcohol, ended up becoming an alcoholic, spiraled downward, and ended up in financial ruin. He lost his job, and his health deteriorated rapidly due to alcohol abuse. My mother, on the other hand, found herself alone and bitter. She felt a bit bad about ruining things with her only son, especially when she realized there would be no one to take care of her when she gets older, especially after Sabrina's death. Although if she were alive, I don't think she would have taken care of my parents either. I know all this from some relatives who contacted me after the ceremony, although I'm not sure if I believe them or not. I don't care either. As for Sabrina's children, Phil and Tyrone, after their mother's death, they found themselves in a tough situation. Despite being mistreated by her for years, they felt lost without her presence. Currently, they are living with my parents, which I don't think is a good idea for them. I wish I could do something for them, but I'm not sure I want to have anything to do with that family. Update 6. I'm back with another update, which I think will be the final one because with Sabrina's death, there aren't many more problems in my life. To let you know that I ended up adopting Phil and Tyrone. After they contacted me, they felt relieved to hear me speak at the funeral and say some harsh truths. They didn't want to have anything to do with the rest of the family, and they had nowhere else to go after Sabrina's death, since their father was in prison. My parents didn't treat them well either, because according to them, both boys had disrespected their deceased mother and had brought shame to the family's name, as if they belonged to some royal family. So I did the right thing and adopted them. We live far away from the rest of the family, and we're living a great life. Phil and Tyrone don't act like their mother at all, and I'm proud to see them becoming great men.